Usually, when we talk about a political diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision, like, I don't know, like engineering or something.
Right. Yeah, like it's a hard science.
Exactly. Like you break your arm, right? And the X-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at it and says, there it is. That's the problem.
Right there in black and white, yeah.
Right. But then you step into the world of mid-19th century global politics, and suddenly that X-ray machine is, it's completely useless. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is just incredibly murky.
Oh, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, you are looking at symptoms that totally contradict each other.
Yeah.
Vital signs that make absolutely zero sense. And a patient, which in this case is the entire European continent, that seems to be like recovering and dying at the exact same time.
It's wild. So, okay, picture the scene. The year is 1853.
Okay.
Europe is in this period of intense, almost suffocating political reaction following the failed democratic revolutions of 1848. Like everything has clamped down.
Utterly clamped down. The conservative powers are back in charge.
Right. And the Communist League, this underground network of radicals, has formally disbanded. The secret police forces of Prussia and Austria and France, they are working overtime.
Oh, yeah, they're hunting people down.
Exactly. So the big question is, how do two of the most famous radical thinkers in history, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, how do they keep their movement alive when the streets are that heavily policed and their organizations are just totally shattered?
It's a huge problem for them.
Right. And believe it or not, they turn to the printing press.
Yeah.
But not just any printing press. Specifically, they turn to a mainstream American newspaper.
Which is just, it's one of the most fascinating pivots in the history of political thought.
Really? It really is. So our mission today for this deep dive is to unpack Volume 12 of the Marx and Engels collected works.
Right, the MECW.
Yes, Volume 12. And this covers a very specific, highly prolific window, which is from March 1853 to February 1854.
A really dense year of writing.
So dense. We are going to explore exactly how Marx and Engels used this vehicle of daily journalism to basically dissect global economics, to expose the real, on-the-ground realities of colonial exploitation, and to analyze the very loud drumbeats of the impending Crimean War.
Yeah, they were covering a lot of ground.
They were. And honestly, if you have ever scrolled through the news on your phone and just felt like you're looking at this blender of random chaos, like a strike over here, a war over there, some random inflation report.
It's overwhelming.
It totally is. But what Marx and Engels did here is basically the antidote to that feeling. They connected the micro to the macro in a way that is, frankly, still studied today.
Absolutely. They built a framework, right? A way to see the structural bones beneath the daily headlines. And they did all of this while functioning essentially as freelance correspondents, just watching the world from exile in England.
From the reading room of the British Museum, mostly.
Yeah.
Now, real quick, before we dive into the actual text, we do need to set our usual ground rules for the deep dive.
Right, the disclaimer.
Yeah, because we are going to be exploring some highly charged political and economic critiques today. We're talking about foundational critiques of capitalism, imperialism, and state power.
Big ones.
The huge ones. So, as always on this show, our job is not to take a side.
No, not at all.
We are not here to endorse the political viewpoints of the source material, and we aren't here to condemn them either. We are strictly here as impartial guides.
Yeah, we're just unpacking these historical arguments exactly as they appear in the text.
Right, so that you can understand what they were saying, why they were saying it in 1853, and how they built their arguments.
Exactly. Our goal is comprehension, not conversion. We're just looking at the architecture of their thought process during a very specific, very volatile historical window.
Perfectly said. Okay, so let's look at the actual mechanics of this setup because the dynamic is honestly wild. The primary outlet for the vast majority of the works in Volume 12 is the New York Daily Tribune.
Yes, a massive paper at the time.
Right. And Marx had actually begun working for them back in August 1851, but this period of 1853 to 1854, it represents just a remarkably prolific era for his contributions.
He was sending them so much material.
He was. But here's the thing I'm struggling with. I'm struggling to see how Marx got away with this. Like, if I'm Charles Dana, he was the editor of the Tribune.
Right. Charles Dana and Horace Greeley was the publisher.
Okay, so if I'm Dana, editing a capitalist bourgeois paper in America, and my London correspondent starts sending me articles about how my entire economic system is basically doomed to collapse, I'm firing him, right?
You would think so, yeah.
Did the editors just not read his stuff closely, or did they genuinely not care as long as it was selling papers?
Well, it wasn't that they didn't care. It was that their immediate political interests aligned in a very specific, very temporary way.
Wait, really? How did they align?
Well, you have to understand the nature of the New York Daily Tribune at that time.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, any run-of-the-mill paper. It played a highly progressive role in United States social life.
Yeah.
Specifically, it strongly condemned slavery and actively supported the abolitionist movement.
Oh, wow. Okay, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. The paper was aligned with the Free Soil movement and eventually the Republican Party. So while Dana and Greeley were definitely capitalists, they were reformist capitalists.
Totally.
They were fighting against this entrenched aristocratic power of the Southern slaveholding class.
Ah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So the conflict between the northern and southern states in the U.S. is really starting to heat up in the 1850s, and the Tribune's anti-slavery stance was attracting this massive, broad readership.
Exactly. And they viewed the reactionary monarchies of Europe, the czars and the kings, with the same disdain that they viewed the plantation owners in the American South.
That is a fascinating parallel. So they saw European autocracy and American slavery as basically twin evils holding back human progress.
Precisely. And Marx and Engels recognized that. They saw that in this suffocating climate of European political reaction, the opportunity to propagate their ideas in the columns of a really popular American newspaper was just invaluable.
Because they had no other outlet.
Right. Without an international working class organization to lean on, the Tribune basically became their megaphone. It was their primary way to preserve their international links and quietly prepare the theoretical conditions for a future proletarian party.
But still, I mean, sneaking revolutionary communist theory into a mainstream paper requires some serious finesse.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, they couldn't just write, "Workers of the world unite every Thursday." Dana would have definitely caught that.
Right. They had to be subtle. And they did it by being undeniably brilliant analysts of current events.
So the quality of the work is what kept them employed.
Yes. The editors of the Tribune even publicly acknowledged how high the quality was. The paper actually published a leading article at one point basically saying, we don't agree with all of Mr. Marx's opinions, but anyone who doesn't read his letters is missing out on the most instructive source of information on European politics.
Wow, they actually printed that.
They did. Marx and Engels were providing this top-tier geopolitical and economic analysis that the Tribune's readers just couldn't get anywhere else.
And so within that really rigorous data analysis, they sort of smuggled in their critique of the capitalist system.
Exactly. They wove it in.
They basically made themselves indispensable. It's almost like, okay, let's unpack this. It's like a radical underground blogger suddenly getting a primetime slot on a major mainstream cable network just because their on-the-ground reporting is too accurate to ignore.
That is a perfect analogy, yeah.
But the physical logistics of this, that's also incredible to think about. I mean, Marx wasn't writing all of this alone, was he?
No, not at all.
He actually enlisted Engels to write a significant chunk of these articles, and Engels was living up in Manchester, right?
Right. He was working at his father's textile firm in Manchester.
Right. So Engels would write these pieces, and then they would appear in the Tribune under Karl Marx's signature as the official correspondent.
Yes. The division of labor between the two of them was absolutely essential for their survival.
Because Marx was so busy.
Because Marx was busy, yes, often deeply immersed in his economic studies at the British Museum, but also because he was dealing with severe poverty and illness in his family in London. It was a very dark time for him personally.
Right.
So when Marx couldn't write, or crucially, when the topic strayed into military strategy, Engels stepped in.
Ah, because Engels was the military guy.
Engels was incredibly adept at military affairs, geography, and foreign policy, which became super crucial as the Crimean War approached.
So they were basically a two-man think tank operating under one name.
Exactly. And they were sending these handwritten manuscripts across the Atlantic on steamships.
Which takes weeks. It really highlights their sheer adaptability. I mean, when they couldn't organize on the streets of Paris or Berlin because the secret police would literally arrest them, they just organized on the page.
Right. They sought to show politically conscious workers that this current reign of conservative reaction across Europe, which looked very solid on the surface, was actually highly unstable.
Underneath, the tectonic plates were shifting.
And that instability, they argued, was most obvious not in the political speeches of kings and queens, but in the economy itself.
So if you wanted to see where the next revolution would come from, you didn't look at a monarch's decree.
No, you looked at the trade returns, the market prices, the foreign exchange rates. They believed the political surface was just a reflection of the economic base.
Which means Marx is spending hours and hours in the reading room poring over raw, boring data.
So much data, yes.
And a major focus of their 1853 and 1854 writings was the economic condition of European countries, right? With a laser focus on the most developed one of all, England.
England was the workshop of the world at this point.
Right. So Marx analyzed British industrial production, agriculture, domestic and foreign trade. He wrote articles for the Tribune with titles like British Population and Trade Returns or Scarcity of Bread.
Very snappy titles.
Very snappy. But he was looking at the raw data of the British Empire to give concrete expression to a thesis he had propounded back in the 1840s, right? The cyclical nature of capitalist production.
Yes, exactly. The idea that capitalism doesn't just grow in a straight, smooth line upwards forever.
And this is where we run into a major clash of ideas, because the mainstream economists of the time, the pro-capitalist thinkers, or what Marx called bourgeois political economists, they represented capitalism as this never-changing, harmonious system.
Right. They argued it would eventually ensure well-being for all classes of society.
They viewed the capitalist mode of production as the final perfected state of human economic evolution. It's like, okay, so what does this all mean? It's like a group of people playing a board game. Let's say Monopoly.
Okay, Monopoly.
And the people winning the game are trying to convince everyone else that the rules of Monopoly aren't just rules they made up, but that they are the actual laws of physics, like gravity.
Like as a natural phenomenon.
Right. And Marx is basically stepping up to the table and saying, no, we invented these rules for this specific era, and the board can be flipped.
Not only can the board be flipped, but Marx is arguing that the players themselves are eventually going to realize the bank's structure guarantees a crash.
Wow, okay.
Marx argued that the secret of bourgeois political economy consisted precisely in that trick.
What trick?
Transforming transitory social relations, meaning relations that belong to a specific historical epoch and a specific state of material production, transforming those into eternal, general, natural laws.
So they were passing off a temporary phase of history as the end of history.
Exactly. He completely rejected the idea that the laws of capitalism were eternal. Because they were historically specific, they were, by definition, temporary.
And he also took aim at specific economic schools of the time to prove this point, right? I remember reading about his critique of Henry Charles Carey.
Yes, Carey was an American economist.
Right. But I want to understand how Marx dismantled Carey's argument, because Carey argued for a harmony of interest between labor and capital, right?
We did, yeah.
Why did Carey think that harmony was possible, and how did Marx prove him wrong in these articles?
Well, Carey's views were heavily influenced by the specific, very unique socioeconomic development of the United States at that time.
Because America was different than Europe.
Very different.
Mm-hmm.
America had these vast expanses of land, which obviously was achieved through the violent displacement of indigenous populations.
Mm-hmm.
But they had this rapidly expanding western frontier.
Right.
And this unique environment temporarily softened the class antagonisms that were already boiling over in Europe.
Oh, I see. Because if an American worker didn't like their wages in a factory on the East Coast, they could just leave.
Exactly. There was at least the theoretical possibility of moving west to farm. This acted as a pressure valve for social unrest.
So Carey looked at that and said, look, capitalism works great.
Right. And Marx argued that Carey was taking the exceptional, temporary conditions of the U.S. and trying to apply them as universal, eternal economic laws.
It's like saying, hey, there's no overcrowding on this life raft right now because we just threw it in the water and there are only 2 of us on it, therefore life rafts never sink.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. He's taking a snapshot of a specific demographic moment and calling it eternity.
And a big part of Marx proving these laws weren't eternal was his focus on the boom and bust cycle.
Yes.
But let's get into the actual mechanics of that. Marx was meticulously distinguishing the different phases in the trade and industrial cycle. He saw that periods of prosperity and overproduction inevitably led to commercial crises.
Inevitably.
But wait, I need to ask, overproduction sounds like a good thing. If we have too much stuff, like too much clothing, too much food, shouldn't things just be cheaper? How does making too many goods cause the entire economy to crash?
That is the core contradiction Marx is exposing.
Yeah.
And it's so important.
Okay, walk me through it.
In a rational system, yes, overproduction would just mean everyone gets a surplus. We have too many coats, everyone gets a coat.
Right.
But in the capitalist system, goods are produced for profit, not for use. The mechanism works like this. Factory owners because they are competing with each other, constantly try to produce more goods faster and cheaper.
To beat the guy across the street.
Exactly. And to do this, they invest in better machinery, and they try to keep their workers' wages as low as possible to maximize their own profit margins.
Okay, so the factories are churning out massive amounts of, say, cotton textiles.
Production is through the roof.
Right.
But here is the fatal flaw. The very workers producing these textiles are not paid enough to actually buy the massive volume of goods they are creating.
Oh, wow.
The capitalist has suppressed wages to increase profit, but by doing so, they have choked off their own consumer base.
Because the workers are the consumers.
Exactly. Suddenly, the market is flooded with goods that no one can afford to buy. This is what Marx means by overproduction.
So the warehouses just fill up.
They fill up. And when the goods don't sell, the capitalists can't turn a profit, so what do? They stop producing.
And they lay off the workers.
They lay off the workers.
That makes sense.
The workers, now with zero income, buy even less. More factories close. The credit system, which was lending money based on the assumption of future sales, it totally freezes up. Banks fail.
A whole system just cascades into a crisis.
Yes. So the crash isn't caused by a lack of resources, like a famine.
It's caused by the mathematical impossibility of workers buying back the value of what they produce.
Exactly. Marx was viewing the boom and bust, not as a glitch in the system or, a mistake made by a central bank. He saw it as a fundamental, unavoidable feature of the capitalist engine.
That is fascinating. And he was actually predicting the economic crisis of 1857 years before it happened, right? Just by reading the tea leaves of the British trade returns in 1853.
Yes. He was telling the readers of the Tribune to look past the current economic boom and see the systemic flaws that would inevitably bring the next crash.
Wow. But, Marx and Engels didn't just look at the factories of England to understand the system, because those factories in Manchester didn't run on English cotton.
No, they did.
They ran on imports.
So did his analysis extend to where the British Empire was actually extracting these raw materials from?
It absolutely did. And this represents a very, very important shift in their work during this volume.
Okay, how so? Well, a new feature in their theoretical and journalistic output in this 1853-54 period is their deep, systematic interest in the historical fate of colonial peoples.
Okay.
They began publishing articles consistently about the situation in the East, exposing what they saw as the predatory policy of capitalist states.
No, we know capitalism exploits colonies. That's a pretty standard critique today. What is genuinely new about their methodology here, compared to what they were writing back in the 1840s?
The shift is from the abstract to the devastatingly concrete.
What do you mean by concrete?
Well, earlier, Marx treated colonial problems mostly on a general theoretical plane. He would explain the general laws of capitalist development and just sort of mention the place of colonial exploitation within that abstract model.
As broadly.
Right. But in the 1850s, through his reporting for the Tribune, he began to pay far more attention to the specific material realities on the ground in colonial countries.
He actually zoomed in.
He was looking at the actual history, the social structures, and the daily mechanisms of colonial rule in places like India and China. Though, to be fair, the broader umbrella often just fell under the East in their diplomatic terminology.
So instead of just saying capitalism exploits colonies in an academic sense, they're zooming in. Give me an example of the material reality they were analyzing. How exactly was the British East India Company extracting this wealth?
Let's look at India.
Okay.
Marx analyzed the British taxation system that was imposed on the Indian population. Because the British didn't just show up and steal goods. They fundamentally restructured the entire economy to force extraction.
How did they restructure it?
They instituted new forms of land tenure and brutal taxation systems. So before the British arrived, Indian village communities often held land communally.
Right.
The British imposed private property rights and these exorbitant land taxes that absolutely had to be paid in cash.
Which means the farmers can no longer just grow food to feed their families or their village. They have to grow something they can sell for cash to pay the tax.
Yes. They were forced to switch from subsistence farming to growing cash crops, like cotton for the mills in Manchester or opium to be sold in China.
Oh, wow.
And if they couldn't pay the tax, their land was seized. Marx detailed how this structural destruction led to horrific, widespread famines.
Because they weren't growing food anymore.
Exactly. He showed how it also destroyed the traditional handloom weaving industry in India because they were flooded with cheap, machine-made British textiles, while simultaneously being forced to export their own raw cotton.
So they were forced to buy the British stuff.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the wealth of the British Empire was directly built on the engineered starvation and deindustrialization of the Indian subcontinent.
That is brutal. And he connects us directly to China as well, right? Because you mentioned opium. The British are forcing farmers in India to grow opium so they can smuggle it into China.
Yes, the opium trade is a prime example of this interconnected web.
I mean, that just sounds like a state-sponsored drug cartel.
It basically was. Britain had a massive trade deficit with China at the time.
Because of tea?
Yes. The British loved Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain. But the Chinese didn't want any British goods in return. They demanded silver.
Right, so the British are bleeding silver.
Exactly. So the British solved this by growing opium in India, smuggling it into China, forcing millions into addiction, and using the silver they made from selling the opium to buy the tea and silk.
Unbelievable.
And when the Chinese government tried to stop this drug smuggling, the British went to war, the Opium Wars, to literally force the markets open.
Using their navy to enforce drug trafficking.
Yes. Marx covered this extensively in the Tribune. He showed that the civilizing mission rhetoric that was always used by European powers was just a thin, hypocritical veil for state-sponsored drug running and massive economic extraction.
They were really ripping the mask off the Victorian era's self-righteousness, weren't they?
Oh, they were tearing it to shreds.
Marx is making the argument that you simply cannot understand the immense wealth and industrial power of 19th century Europe without understanding the active, violent exploitation of the East. The two are permanently linked.
Completely linked.
The factories in Manchester are only humming because of the resources and the wealth being pulled out of colonial territories.
And this focus on the East wasn't just about tracing the flow of money and goods either. The East, specifically the Near East and the borders of the Ottoman and Russian empires, was rapidly becoming the geopolitical powder keg of the entire era.
Which leads us nicely to the drums of war.
Yes, the big one.
This is arguably the most dominant pillar of Volume 12, the Eastern Question.
It takes up so much of the volume.
Right. So in 1853, tension was rapidly escalating between Tsarist Russia and the Western powers, which was primarily Britain and France over influence in the Near East and the Balkans.
Right.
And this diplomatic standoff would eventually explode into the Crimean War. But I want to ground this for a second because expanding influence sounds like, a game of Risk.
Very abstract, yeah.
What does expanding influence actually mean materially? Like, why are these massive empires willing to go to war over this specific territory?
It comes down to geography, trade routes, and naval supremacy.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, the Ottoman Empire, which controlled modern-day Turkey, the Balkans, parts of the Middle East, it was weakening.
They called it the sick man of Europe, right?
Exactly. And Tsarist Russia saw a golden opportunity. Russia is a massive land empire, but its Achilles heel has always been access to warm water ports.
Because their northern ports freeze in the winter.
Exactly. So they wanted control of the Black Sea and, crucially, the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits.
Which is the choke point between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean.
Right. If Russia controls those straits, their navy can freely project power into the Mediterranean Sea. Furthermore, the Black Sea region was a massive producer of grain, which was economically vital.
And Britain did not like this?
Britain was absolutely terrified of Russian expansion. Britain was an island nation completely dependent on its naval supremacy and its global trade routes to maintain its empire.
Especially its routes to India.
Especially India. So if Russia gained a foothold in the Mediterranean, it directly threatened British naval dominance. Moreover, the British textile industry relied heavily on keeping the Black Sea open for exports and imports.
So it wasn't about saving the Ottoman Empire because they loved the Ottomans.
Oh, not at all. Britain and France propped up the decaying Ottoman Empire strictly to use it as a buffer state to block Russian expansion.
Wow. It's purely economic and strategic self-interest, completely masked as diplomatic alliances and, moral high ground.
100%. And Marx and Engels covered this buildup obsessively.
We are talking about specific, highly detailed articles with titles like The Real Issue in Turkey or Policy of Napoleon on the Turkish Question and What is to Become of Turkey in Europe.
Yes. And here is where that division of labor we talked about earlier really, really shines.
Because of Engels.
Yes. Engels took the lead on a massive amount of the military analysis.
Engels was the military genius of the duo.
He had an incredible grasp of military strategy, geography, and army organization. He was so good at it that he later earned the nickname the General among his friends.
That's amazing.
At Marx's request, Engels wrote a whole series of articles from mid-March to early April 1853, just analyzing the brewing conflict. And he wasn't just talking about abstract diplomacy.
What was he writing about?
He was looking at the actual topography of the Balkans. He analyzed the logistical nightmares of moving armies across the Danube River. He wrote in intense detail about the fortifications at Silistria and how a siege there would physically operate.
Because he understood that 19th century warfare was fundamentally about supply lines and terrain.
Exactly. He understood the material reality of war.
And while Engels is doing that, while he's mapping out troop movements and river crossings, Marx is analyzing the parliamentary debates in London. He's exposing the diplomatic hypocrisy and the underlying economic motives of the Tsar and the Western politicians.
Right, Marx is handling the political economy side.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. It's like having a revolutionary philosopher and a master military tactician secretly writing your daily Pentagon briefings.
It really is.
They are dissecting the grand strategies of empires for a mainstream American audience.
And they synthesized foreign policy, military strategy, and economic motives in a way that provided the Tribune's readers with an absolute masterclass in 19th century geopolitics.
It's incredible, but for Marx and Engels, this wasn't just academic military history, was it?
No, not at all.
They were analyzing this brewing continental war through the lens of proletarian interests.
Yes.
And I want to make sure we understand that phrase, through the lens of proletarian interests, when we are talking about empires fighting each other. I mean, the working class wasn't starting this war. They were just the ones who were going to die in it.
Sadly, yes.
So what does it mean to analyze this from their perspective?
It means they were trying to figure out how this massive conflict between reactionary empires might actually shake the foundation of conservative Europe and create an opening for a working-class revolution.
Looking for the silver lining.
Exactly. They saw Tsarist Russia as the ultimate bulwark of reaction in Europe. Russia was basically the policeman that would always step in to crush democratic revolutions.
Like they did in Hungary in 1849.
Exactly like Hungary.
Yeah.
So Marx and Engels believed a military defeat for Tsarist Russia could be a huge catalyst for a new revolutionary upsurge across Europe.
So they wanted Russia to lose.
They absolutely wanted Russia to lose.
But they didn't want Britain and France to win, did they?
No. They relentlessly exposed the hypocrisy of Britain and France as well.
Because they were just fighting for their own monopolies.
Right. They showed that the Western powers weren't fighting for liberty or the independence of Turkey, but merely for their own economic and strategic dominance.
So what was their ideal outcome?
Marx and Engels were essentially looking for the cracks in the imperial armor. They wanted all the empires to exhaust each other.
Mutual destruction.
Pretty much. They believed that the financial strain of a massive war, the disruption of global trade, and the inevitable military blunders would exacerbate the internal contradictions of capitalism we discussed earlier.
The war would speed up the economic crisis.
And the economic crisis would trigger the revolution.
It's like they were watching a hurricane form. Engels is tracking the massive barometric pressure drops over the ocean, right? The grand geopolitical movements, the shifting of naval fleets.
Right.
But they knew that wasn't the whole picture. To prove the storm was real, they also had to look at the ground level. While Engels is watching the ocean, Marx is on the ground in a single town, showing how the first gusts of wind are blowing the roofs off houses.
That's a really good way to visualize it.
They needed both the macro and the micro to prove the systemic instability. Which brings us to the localized events they covered.
Yes. Volume 12 contains coverage of highly specific localized events that Marx and Engels use to illustrate those exact, broader trends. A perfect example is Marx's coverage of the Preston strike in Britain.
The Preston strike. Okay, walk us through the machinery of this strike. What were the workers actually demanding, and why does a strike in one English town matter so much to their global macro analysis?
Well, in late 1853 and early 1854, textile workers in Preston went on a massive, prolonged strike.
Okay.
The immediate cause was wage suppression. Years earlier, during an economic downturn, the mill owners had cut wages by 10%, and they promised to restore that 10% when trade improved.
I can see where this is going.
Yeah, well, trade improved massively. The mill owners were making record profits, but they completely refused to restore the wages.
Classic. So the workers walked out.
They walked out. And Marx wrote extensively about different episodes of this strike. He analyzed how the workers organized, how they raised funds from other towns to sustain the strike, and how the factory owners colluded with each other to lock out workers and literally starve them into submission.
Wow. And for Marx, this wasn't just a local labor dispute.
Yeah.
It was a physical manifestation of the underlying class war he had theorized. I read that he explicitly connected the struggles of the starving, striking workers in Preston to the legacy of the heroic uprising of the Paris workers in June 1848.
He did. The June days in Paris were considered the first great civil war between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie.
Right.
By linking Preston in 1853 to Paris in 1848, Marx was basically telling his Tribune readers, the revolution isn't dead, it just changed venues.
It moved from the barricades to the factories.
Exactly. The battle lines are still drawn, and they're drawn right here in the factories of England. He was showing that the cyclical economic crisis, that overproduction mechanism we talked about, was resulting in real, tangible class conflict on the ground.
The macroeconomic theory was playing out in the streets of Preston.
Yeah,
And while Marx is covering the striking workers in England, Engels is covering a very different kind of localized chaos in Switzerland.
Right. Engels wrote a really detailed report describing a separatist putsch, which is a failed uprising by clerical and conservative elements in the Freiburg canton of the Swiss Republic.
This was in the spring of 1853.
Yes. The conservative forces were trying to overthrow the radical democratic government of the canton.
Okay, so a right-wing coup attempt.
Exactly. And Engels used this highly localized event to analyze the lingering strength of reactionary forces attempting to roll back democratic gains, even in a relatively stable republic like Switzerland.
Just to show how fragile the political stability of Europe really was.
Exactly. It was all connected.
And this brings up one of the most frustrating, relatable details of this entire era for anyone who has ever worked in publishing or journalism or content creation.
Well, the editorial quirk.
The editors. Please tell the story about how this Swiss article actually went to print, because it's maddening.
It perfectly illustrates the physical realities of 19th century print journalism. So Marx received Engels' report on the Swiss putsch. He translated it, he added his own writings on the general political situation in Europe to contextualize it, and he sent the whole package to New York on a steamship as one large, comprehensive report.
A beautifully constructed, unified thesis.
Right. He designed it to be read together, showing the reactionary putsch in Switzerland alongside the broader European context. But the Tribune editors, looking at this massive wall of text and just needing to fill space in their daily editions, decided to chop the material straight down the middle.
Just arbitrarily cut it in half.
Literally.
Yeah.
They published the two parts as completely separate articles, one in the afternoon edition and one in the evening edition.
Having your carefully constructed ideological argument chopped in half just to fit the evening layout, I mean, that has to be infuriating.
Oh, they were so mad.
This raises an important question, though. How did Marx and Engels navigate the whims of these bourgeois editors while trying to maintain the integrity of their reporting?
It was incredibly frustrating for them. Marx frequently complained in his private letters to Engels about the Tribune altering, cutting, or delaying his articles.
Did they ever completely rewrite them?
Yes. Sometimes the editors would take a piece Marx wrote as standard correspondence and run it as an unsigned editorial, basically taking credit for his brilliance to boost the paper's prestige.
Wow.
Or they would cut out the most radical theoretical parts entirely and just keep the military analysis.
But they tolerated it. I mean, they kept writing for them for years. Why?
Because they had to.
They needed the money.
The platform was too valuable, and yes, the income, though meager, was absolutely necessary for Marx's survival. He was living in desperate poverty in Soho at this time. He was often pawning his own tote just to buy paper to write on.
Pawning his coat just to get paper, that's bleak.
So they had to balance their desire to spread revolutionary theory with the reality of writing for an American capitalist paper that cared about circulation, advertising, and column inches.
It was a constant negotiation.
It really was. They would write the analysis in a way that was objective and deeply informative enough to satisfy Dana and Greeley, while embedding the structural critique for the politically conscious readers.
It's an incredible balancing act. I mean, from analyzing the grand, sweeping strategies of Napoleon III and the hypocrisy of the London press, all the way down to the street-level realities of striking workers in Preston and clerical conspiracies in Switzerland, and dealing with editors chopping up their copy.
A lot.
The sheer vividness and scope of their coverage in this single year is staggering. They were operating on multiple frequencies at once.
They were simultaneously historians, economists, military strategists, and daily reporters.
And they did it all to maintain the intellectual continuity of a movement that had been driven entirely underground.
Exactly.
Let's synthesize the journey we've been in on today. Volume 12 of the collected works shows Marx and Engels at a truly fascinating crossroads. They are exiled in England, they are entirely without a formal political organization or party, and yet they are wielding their pens as absolute weapons. They took the unlikely platform of the New York Daily Tribune and used it to dissect what bourgeois economists called the eternal laws of capitalism. They explain the mechanics of overproduction and the inevitability of the boom and bust cycle.
They mapped the whole thing out.
Right. They expose the predatory concrete realities of colonial extraction in the East, showing how the British taxation system engineered famine in India. And they managed to predict and analyze the geographical choke points and geopolitical tremors that would become the Crimean War.
All while ghostwriting for each other and dealing with annoying editors.
Right. What Marx and Engels did in 1853, connecting macro systems like global capitalism and imperial war to micro events like a strike in Preston or a putsch in Switzerland, that is a blueprint for critical thinking.
It absolutely is. And, in our own era of information overload where the news feels like a disconnected stream of just chaotic events, their method really teaches us to look for the structural connections.
Yes, to zoom out.
To ask the material questions. Who actually benefits from this economic policy? What is the underlying financial reality behind this diplomatic speech? How does a supply chain issue on one side of the globe relate to a labor dispute on the other?
It's about looking past the surface noise, the daily turbulence of the hurricane, and finding the engine running underneath it all.
Exactly.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly provocative thought for you to mull over. Marx and Engels used a mainstream anti-slavery newspaper in America to secretly plant the seeds of international proletarian theory during a time of extreme continent-wide political suppression.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder, if you look closely at the massive mainstream digital platforms of our own age, whether it's a Substack, a major YouTube channel, or a viral social media account, whose revolutionary seeds are being quietly planted right under our noses today?
That's a great question.
Who is using the primetime algorithms to prepare the ground for the next big historical shift?
It forces us to ask who is writing the architecture of the future inside the very systems they wish to change.
We started today by talking about how political diagnosis in 1853 wasn't as clean as reading a broken bone on an X-ray. It was a murky, chaotic landscape. But by the time you finish reading Volume 12, you realize that Marx and Engels didn't just stare at the muddy waters.
No, they didn't.
They built a brand new kind of X-ray machine one that could see through the political speeches and the diplomatic treaties right down to the economic bones of society. And whether you agree with their diagnosis or not, the machine they built changed the way we look at the world forever. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.